Alright, continuing on, we're going to be moving on into looking at absolute values and looking at solving them with equations and inequalities. So this is a lot of information, and we're going to try to get through this quickly, so a lot of this is going to be burned through as fast as we can. Okay, so don't worry about missing some of this. Again, work on some of these problems, practice them, and so on and so forth. So, okay. Solving an absolute value. So if you remember an absolute value, what an absolute value is it's the distance away from 0 in which a number is. So again, negative 8, the absolute value of negative 8 is 8. Okay, and so that's what we have here. Now, if I say that some number, so if I were to say the absolute value of x is 5, okay, there's two possible numbers that x could be. X could either be negative 5 or positive 5. We don't know which one it is. And so that's what we have to look for when we solve these. Each of these are going to be broken up into two separate problems. We've got negative 12 and 12. So that's what we're going to do. Since either 12 and negative 12 can work, we break it up into an OR statement with two separate. We keep everything inside the absolute value the same, but we change the number. We have one positive, one negative, solve each of them separately. And then after that, what we're going to do is that we're going to solve each of these by plugging them back in, because we've got to make sure they work, because we've got two answers. So we'll plug an 8 in for the y, solve it, see if it works. In this case, it does work. And then we plug in a negative 4 into it and see if it works. And in this case, it also works. So when you have these absolute values, sometimes you have two solutions. That's perfectly fine. That's not a problem. Okay? And so that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to make sure you're checking your work as you're moving along. Okay? Right. So again, you're checking, plugging this in, breaking up into two separate. With the absolute value, you have a positive and negative, breaking up into two, and then solving each of these separate equations. Okay? So now looking at this one. Now, before we can break it up into two separate equations, what we're going to have to do is that we're going to have to get the absolute value by itself. Because before we can break it up into two parts, we've got to get the absolute value by itself. And so what we're going to do here is that we're going to add 5 to both sides. Okay, that gets us a 15 is equal to that 3 absolute value. So this whole thing is still sitting in there. And then we divide, let's do it underneath, divide by 3 on both sides, which gets us 5. So we've got the absolute value is equal to 5. Now with this, and again this is the 4w minus 1. So we have our absolute value. Now from here we break it up into, we're going to have 5 and negative 5. And then we're going to solve these separately. Okay. So as you see here, the next step, we move the 5 over to get to here. We divided by 3 to get to there. And then after that, we broke it up into our 2. We've got 5 and negative 5, solve it all the way through. 3 halves and negative 1. Plug both of those back into the original to make sure they work. And then as we see, they both work. Okay. The reason why we have to keep checking these is something called extenuous solutions. And what basically it is even though you might solve for two answers, one of them might not work. Okay, absolute values are not the only time this occurs. Square roots, this also occurs. And other times where you have numbers that cannot exist. You have to make sure you're checking. So that's why we're going back and we're plugging these numbers back into the original to see if they work. Okay, and that's what we're going to be doing with all these. So you're going to have to make sure you're checking all these as you move along. So now here's one that you have to check your extenuous solutions. So as you see here, we've got the absolute value is equal to 3x plus 4. Okay, it's not just a separate number. We actually have a variable here. Now when we break this up, okay, what's happening is that we take the original, x plus 4, and then the other one we're going negative 1 times 3x plus 4. And then we're going to multiply this negative into both parts, which changes the sign, negative 3x minus 4. Right? So as you see, when we plug them in and we multiply it through, we get two separate answers. One is the original, and the other one all the signs have changed. Okay. And now from there we break it up into our 2 and we solve it like normal. Okay. As you see, broken up into 2, and then we solved it all the way through. Move the x to the other side, etc., etc., getting x by itself. Okay, which is just solving equations, which hopefully everybody is up to this point Otherwise, make sure you go back and you review how to solve for equations. And then from here, we're going to check both of these. So we'll plug in 1 into this equation. So when we plug in 1, we get 2 plus 5, which is 7. And then on the other side, we get 3 times 1, which is 3 plus 4, which is 7. 7, absolute value of 7 is 7, which works. Okay, so 1 works. Hooray, we've got an answer. Now we go over to the next one with x is equal to negative 9/5. We plug in negative 9/5 into both of these to see if they work. Now, the reason we know that this one isn't going to work is that if we plug it into the second one, okay, negative 9/5 times 3 is about 27 over 5, which is about 7/5 larger than 4. And so what that means is that we're going to have a negative number. Well, we can never have a negative number with an absolute. Absolute values always turn them positive, which means this number doesn't work. Now, if you want to check, if you're having trouble understanding what that is exactly, if you actually plug these numbers, both these numbers into it, this negative 9/5 into both sides, you'll see it will not come out. One's going to be positive, one's going to be negative, but they're going to be the same number. Okay. So as you see, 1 is the only one that works. All right, absolute values with inequalities. So we've dealt with inequalities already, the and or statements. And so with absolute values, they're always an and or an or statement. Now, if the absolute value is opening, we're going to be looking at opening, okay? The alligator teeth. Which side is it eating? Okay. Which side is it going to be biting into them? Now, if it's opening towards the absolute, it's an or statement. So if it's towards the absolute, it's an or. And then you'll write it like this. The first statement, or switch the sign negative k, or keep the original without the absolute. And now the next one is an and statement. And with an and statement, it's opening away from the absolute. So if it's opening away from the absolute, it's an and. If it's opening towards, okay, it's going to be an or. So since it's an and statement, we can write it like this. Negative the number is less than x is less than k, which this can be rewritten as x is greater than or equal to negative k, and x is less than or equal to k. Those are exactly the same. Either one will work with me. I'm not picky with either one, whichever one you're more comfortable with. So now let's look at this statement. So we're looking here. First thing we have to do is get everything besides the absolute onto the other side. So we're going to move the 9 over, and then we're going to move the 3 over. So when we move the 9 over, we end up getting about a 24, and then we divide by 3, which gets us 8. So we have 8, and then we have our absolute 2x plus 5. So since it's opening away from it, it's an and statement, okay? Which means we're going to write it as negative 8 is less than 2x plus 6 is less than 8. And now we're going to solve this. So with this, if you have it written like this, you're going to go negative 6, so subtract 6, and you're going to move it to all the parts. Gets us a negative 14 is less than 2x is less than 2. Divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2 gets us negative 7 is less than x is less than 1. And that would be your answer. That's your range of answers. Okay. As you see, it's going to pop up here. So again, this is, if you have it on a number line, it goes from negative 7 to 1, including 0, and we have that part. Okay. And so that's with an and statement. You could also break it up into the two separate. Okay, so your IRAT. What your IRAT you're going to do, you're going to solve each of these. Make sure you remember to break up into the two separate. So you're going to have your two answers for these. Make sure you look at the inequality, see if it's an and or statement. Remember to check your extenuating solutions. Okay. All right. Have those done, bring them to class.